If your dog gets out the front door, you don't have time to grab leash and clicker and harness and treats and all this equipment. You need to get out, get your dog, get them back home safely. Using a different schedules of reinforcement will allow you to get that response without having all that equipment with you.
I could be a mess, stressed in yesterday. He don't care less, he sees me anyway. Yeah, he sees me anyway. My dog thinks I'm great, he thinks I'm number one. He never hates, even when I'm done.
Welcome to this episode of Dog Leads. I'm your host, Steve Bishop. I'm a certified dog trainer. I've been training professionally for about 15 years. I am a member of the Pet Professional Guild, a Family Paws parent educator, and I hold a BA in psychology with a minor in sociology. If you have any questions or you would like to hear me talk about a specific topic, you can leave a message in the comments. Or you can email me at bishopsgatetraining@gmail.com.
This episode is brought to you by It Goes Without Saying What Our Dogs Are Trying to Tell Us, presented by Steve Bishop. The presentation will be held on January 10th. Advanced registration is required. The link is in the description. Stephen Bishop, certified dog trainer, explores how to better understand our canine companions by delving into their body language, behavior, and vocalizations.
Schedule of reinforcement is basically the delivery of the reinforcer, whether it's a treat or a toy or whatever your dog's responding to. It follows that target response or the behavior that we're looking for. Different schedules have different rates of reliability. Until the behavior is acquired, it can be inconsistent and irregular. So when we're teaching a new behavior, we want to start with what's called a continuous reinforcement schedule. And this just means every time the dog does what we're asking, we're going to reinforce it. This allows for more reinforcement, and it's great for that acquisition stage of the behavior. They know they're getting reinforced every time they do whatever the behavior is. So if we're asking for a sit, for example, every time the butt hits the floor, we're going to reinforce that behavior. The problem with this is once the reinforcer is not present, you don't have that treat in your hand, again, the behavior can be unreliable. So a lot of people come to class and they say, well, the dog only responds when I have a treat in my hand or I have the treat pouch on. The dogs know, they can smell it, they know that the treats are there. So we want to start implementing a fading protocol. There's two ways that we can do this. One is a fixed ratio and one is a variable ratio. The fixed ratio, just like it sounds, it's a set number of times. Every third time the dog sits, we're going to reinforce that. The variable ratio, it hovers around an average. So yeah, you might wait for the dog to sit 3 times and then reinforce that, and then 5 times, and then 4 times, and then 6 times, and then 3 times. So you're kind of mixing it up a little bit. We liken this to sitting at a slot machine at a casino. You're not being reinforced every single time, but those slot machines pay out often enough that people will sit there for hours and hours pumping their quarters in. So it's going to pay out eventually. Just have enough quarters to get that next payout and that next payout. So it's the same kind of idea. I think I've talked about this in a previous episode. We're getting to 20 episodes, if you can believe it, and I'm kind of having a hard time keeping track of what I've talked about in my classes, what I've talked about with my clients, and what I've talked about on the podcast. So forgive me if this is a repeat, but it's relevant here. So my brother calls this raccooning, where if you put food out on your porch every single night, that raccoon is going to come back occasionally and get something to eat. That's your continuous reinforcement schedule. If you only put it out like 3 times a week or 4 times a week, that raccoon's going to come back every single night to see if that food is there. So that's your variable ratio. It can be very reinforcing, particularly once you're trying to get rid of the treats and still have the dog respond. This would be the next step. that you'll go through, and I'm going to circle back to that after I talk about a couple of other things. Another schedule of reinforcement we used is either a fixed interval or a variable interval, and that has more to do with time as opposed to occurrences. So the fixed ratio and variable ratio, those are after a certain number of occurrences. The fixed interval and variable interval is after a certain amount of time, whatever that time is that you've set. And so this would be used for things like a sit stay, where you want them to keep going, loose leash walking, staying in position, a heel where you want them to stay in position, those types of things where it's not just a one and done like a sit or a down, but we want the dog to keep going, to keep doing what they're doing. The problem here is a lot of people, and myself included, will use the reinforcer as kind of an all done cue. So once a dog gets that reinforcer, they stop doing whatever it is, whether it's the sit or the loose leash, they start to wander. The sit stay, they can break that stay. There's nothing wrong with that, but you just really want to be aware of what it is you want your dog to do. With my dogs, I've always said I just want a good companion, a well-behaved companion, polite companion. So I'm okay with them stopping the behavior once I give that reinforcer, and I can decide when I'm going to give that. But if I was showing, for example, I'm running around the ring, I want to be able to reinforce the dog and still keep going until the judge says it's time to stop. Or if I'm doing agility, I want to be able to encourage the dog, particularly when we're learning the obstacles, but have them go on to the next obstacle and not just stop right there. So it's more complicated than that, obviously, but that's kind of to give you an idea of what I'm talking about here. So the fixed interval is just like the fixed ratio. It's a reinforcing after the same amount of time each time. And then the variable interval would be that hovering around a average. The next two are probably my favorites, and I think it has more to do with, I just like saying them. When I was going through my certification class, I could say differential reinforcement of an incompatible behavior, and I kind of felt like, look at the big brain on Steve kind of a thing. But all it means is reinforcing a behavior different from the behavior that's occurring. So differential reinforcement of an incompatible behavior. Incompatible just means the two things aren't compatible. So if the dog's barking, you give them something to put in their mouth. If the dog's jumping up, you would teach them an off. So it's if they have something in their mouth, they can't bark. If they're off, which I think I've mentioned before, also off for me means all 4 feet on the floor. I don't care if the dog's standing, sitting, laying down, all 4 feet on the floor. If their feet are on the floor, they can't jump up. So that's the incompatible. The differential reinforcement of an alternate behavior is giving the dog something totally different to do. So a good example, when we first got Duncan, he came from a situation where there were several dogs around and he was just right in the middle of them. He was kind of the runt, had trouble getting food because a person would just come out and put food in a bowl for all the dogs, and they kind of had to push each other out of the way to get fed, and him being the smallest, he didn't get fed as much as the other dogs. I don't want to say he was underweight when we got him, but he was definitely a little bit on the skinny side. So when we got him, it was him and Puck. Puck was, used to having food available, but when we would feed Duncan, he would stand there and just bark, and I could not get him to stop. And this actually happened while I was in my certification class, so I was trying to apply these things that I was learning as I was going. So the first thing I tried was, I've mentioned he loved tennis balls to the point of obsession. I would give him a tennis ball to hold in his mouth, but this was when we first got him, he wasn't interested in the tennis ball as much as the food. The other thing I tried was giving him a couple of pieces of kibble, have something in his mouth so that he wouldn't be barking. So he would just eat the food so fast that he would go right back to barking before I could get the food out. So I was trying all these different things. And then I was lamenting to my wife one evening as I'm feeding the dog. It's like, I just don't know what else to do. And she says, well, I just make him sit. And I just facepalmed because I've been trying this reinforcement of a incompatible behavior, but I hadn't thought to try an alternative behavior, and for whatever reason it worked. He could still see the food, he still wanted the food, he could still bark just fine, but he didn't. And I think it was the fact that he, had something else to do, kind of slowed him down so he could think about it. It's like, oh, they're putting the food out. I'm going to be able to get it in just a second here as soon as he puts it in the bowl if he just hurry up, kind of a thing. For those problem behaviors in particular, differential reinforcement can be very handy in getting rid of or eliminating those problems. So we're putting that problem behavior on extinction, but we're reinforcing something else, whether it's an incompatible behavior or an alternate behavior. So how this all ties together, in my group classes, week 1, we work on the sit, and that is the continuous reinforcement. Every time the dog sits, we're going to reinforce it. If the students have been practicing, by week 3, I talk about fading and generalizing, which we won't go into generalizing here, but the fading is starting to throw in those variable ratios of reinforcement. So we'll ask for a sit, we'll give the dog a treat. We'll ask for a sit, we'll give the dog a treat. Then we ask for a sit and we give them lots of praise. So anytime the dog does something I want them to, I'm going to reinforce that somehow. And in this case, it's with praise, lots of pets. Oh, what a good boy, you're so smart. But we're going to withhold that reinforcer, that discriminative stimuli, it's called. So we're going to do that several times until the dog's offering the behavior consistently. And then we might go to a treat, praise, treat, praise, treat, praise. And then we might go to treat, praise, praise, treat, praise, praise, treat, praise, praise, treat, etc. So we're slowly getting rid of or fading that reinforcer, but still having the dog respond. One of the things I want to caution is, and I've mentioned this before, but it bears repeating, it's easy to talk through this stuff really quickly, but it might be 2 or 3 training sessions where I'm doing the treat, treat, praise, treat, treat, praise, and then another 2 or 3 training sessions where it might be a treat, praise, treat, praise, treat, praise. So take your time, go at the dog's pace, make sure they are understanding what's expected every single time. There's a lot of debate in the dog training community. Some people say, oh, a dog only has to do something 4 times without error and then you can move to the next step. And other people say, oh no, it's got to be 7. I believe it's dependent on the dog. There are behaviors that some dogs excel at, have no problem. They may have the behavior in 2 trials, and another behavior, it may take them 7 or 8 or 9. So kind of gauge where your dog is at with that behavior, and don't be afraid if you go to the next step and the dog's not responding. Take a step back and go back and work on it a little bit more, where you're reinforcing a little more often with that food reinforcer or the toy or whatever stimulus you're using. And then the other thing with the fading, you want to make sure you're reinforcing those behaviors every once in a while. So when I am teaching my dog a new behavior, for example, I start with something really simple like a sit, and I treat it like the first time they've done it. I jackpot them, which means just give them a lot of treats, a lot of extra treats, lots of pets, lots of praise. Oh my gosh, what a smart dog, smartest dog I've ever met. And it gets them in the mind that it's time to work, but it also keeps that behavior really, really well reinforced. And then I go through whatever the new behavior is I'm working on, and then at the end of the training session I'll ask for something else that they know really well, like maybe a down. And same thing, I jackpot it, treat it like it's the first time they've done it. Oh my gosh, it's so exciting. That, again, it keeps that behavior really well reinforced, but it also ends the training session on a good note, so everybody's happy and looks forward to coming back to the training session again next time. Hopefully that gives you some ideas on how to apply these schedules of reinforcement, how to get rid of those treats and still have the dog respond. And as always, if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to get in touch with me. Just a few housekeeping things. Reminder, podcast is available on, let's see, I'm on Spotify, Apple, and iHeartRadio. I'm probably going to be expanding that to a few other platforms also here in the next year. I also have been in touch with Parks and Recreation locally, and I'm going to have some more speaking engagements. So if you're interested in those, keep an ear out. I've got a few different topics that I'm going to be talking about, and you can listen to me talk for about an hour as opposed to 15-minute increments. As always, if you have any comments, any questions, feel free to get in touch with me. You can leave a comment here, or you can email me at bishopsgatetraining@gmail.com. Happy New Year, everybody.